welcome to today's episode of Ask Jerry and Ray Anything About IBM Z. And today's topic is, what is JCL?
Uh, Thank you, Ray. Yes, we're going to talk about JCL today. And JCL is such a broad subject that we're going to break it down into three parts. Now, we're so generous that we not only gave you one question, we gave you three. What is JCL? What does JCL do? And why is JCL important? So today, we're going to focus on just that beginning topic of what is JCL. All right, so we're looking to understand JCL in mainframe computing. It's a definition, functions, and why it matters. All right, so we're going to have an introduction to JCL and its definition. And then our second topic for the day is core functionality of JCL. All right, so let's start with the question of what does JCL stand for? And JCL stands for Job Control Language. So it's defined as a scripting language used on IBM mainframe operating systems. And what this does, it allows you to tell the system what you want to do and when you want to do it. So, okay, yeah, I've got a job. You say, I want to submit it. Um, you tell it what class you want it to run in, and you tell it the specifics of what you want to try to accomplish, what programs you want to run, what resources you want to use, where the output goes, where the input comes from. And all of this is specified in the JCL so that your job will do what you want it to do. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at the history of JCL. And I've been involved in most of this uh, starting in the 70s. In the 1960s, there was OS 360, and this was the introduction of JCL in the 1960s. And it replaced manual intervention with automatic job control. Then we move on to the 70s. This is where I started working, and it gave us expanded batch automation, it strengthened scheduling, and this is where I learned JCL. So it was basic, fundamental. Next week we'll talk about what makes up JCL, but for right now, we're just going to look at these are the things that are JCL. So then we move into the 1990s and 2000s, and they added a few more instructions to give you better control of what was happening in the system. So you had various things that happened. You could specify new things. And then in the 2020s, we have continued relevance. Okay, so JCL is still the same, the way that you
Yeah.
get a job.
Now, do your old jobs
Ah,
still work, or did you have to update them, like you said, when they came out with the new things?
well, yes, your old JCL works. When they came out with new things, they were basically add-ons, so that you would just add those into your existing JCL and do the new and fancy things. Without that, your JCL was the same as it always was. Now, in my case, I can take some of the JCL that I wrote in the 70s and run it today unchanged because the basic
That's
functionality
awesome.
of JCL hasn't changed. All right, so where is JCL used in computing? It's used in banking and finance, insurance, government, and any large enterprise generally uses uh, the mainframe, and as such, they have to use JCL. It allows you security, it allows you support, it takes care of backups, and all of this is done by using JCL. All right, so now we're going to look at the core functionality of JCL and turn that over to
All
Ray.
right. Yeah, so the core functionality of JCL, as Jerry said, is job control. So what you do, you have to submit this to the system in order for the system to do anything. And so in the JCL, you tell the system what resources to use, as Jerry said, what sequence to do things in, what programs to use, um, exception handling. So, if the job doesn't do something correctly, you can actually kind of build in your own um, contingencies to try and prevent failures. But jobs do fail, and you know having to fix them is part of the job. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, you control input and output operations. That is the core part of running the mainframes we've discussed before. Is you have input, it does processing, it gives you output. And so you need to know, how are these data sets defined? Where are they? Where's the output going? And if there is any kind of orchestration, because multiple jobs run at the same time. So do they use the same resources? Which order do they use the resources in? Because if you've got something that's updating tables and something else that's reading the tables, you don't want to read it before it's been updated, right? So you got to orchestrate that. And so, the resource allocation, as you can see here, there's a big flow of how things go through the system, the devices it can use, printers, tape, disk, terminals. Even though everything's an emulator these days, we still refer to it as a terminal, but it's still one of the primary interactions that people have with the mainframe. And so you can see, on any of these devices, what happened after you ran the job. And then, going back to the orchestration topic, scheduling. Uh, these big companies, they have their nightly batch windows. They have, manufacturing processes. Do your orders get printed off at 3 a.m., for first shift? You know, do they get printed off before every shift? Your transportation companies, they have the information of what gets loaded into the trucks. And so you have to schedule all of this stuff in the system to make sure, again, that it runs at the correct time and in the correct order. And as we've talked about before, one of the major things is parallel processing, and so the CPU allocation. Technically, a CPU can only perform one action at a time. However, when you have multiple CPUs running, you can actually, kind of split the work and have multiple jobs running at the same time, but you can still run into bottlenecks, and that's where, things like priorities and, resource allocation again comes into play. The scheduler is a very complex system that is the backbone of, what keeps all these JCL jobs running and, working in order. Another thing too is memory management. The mainframe is just a giant server. It might have 2 terabytes of memory, whereas your computer has like maybe 32 gigabytes of memory. And so that's a lot of stuff that has to be taken care of. The different subsystems take up memory, the different jobs that are running take up memory. Even the users logged in, with their TSO sessions, they take up memory as well. And so the JCL and the CPU kind of allocate the amount of memory, to each of these systems, to each of these jobs. And then, if something's running, but it requires a little bit more memory, it's going to have to sit over there and wait until something else gets freed up before it can run. And hey, mainframes are kind of becoming a hot topic again. Unfortunately, people have realized that the workforce is aging. They weren't doing a lot of hiring and training for a while. And so a lot of companies are now putting out these free resources. So you can check out this one here to get a little bit of a head start on, learning some JCL and trying to figure it out for yourself. But we will be back again next week to talk about more JCL, more of the in-depth things of how they work and, the fancy things they can do.
All right. And I just want to take this time to specify that we did not write this. This is something that was already
Yeah.
written, and you can use it to enhance your knowledge.
Yeah.
So,
It's not our work. We're not sponsored by them, all that fun stuff. It's, again, a free resource that we found was kind of cool.